Researchers sat two groups of people down and gave them a simple problem to solve, nothing unusual. A standard cognitive test. One group performed normally. The other group scored the equivalent of 13 IQ points lower. Not because they were less intelligent, not because they were less educated. The only difference between the two groups was that one of them was worried about money. 13 points. That is the difference between average and gifted, depending on where you land on the scale. It disappeared entirely when the financial pressure was removed. This is not a story about intelligence. It is a story about what your brain does when it does not have enough, and why that has almost nothing to do with discipline. The standard explanation for why poor people stay poor is simple. They make bad decisions. They spend money they don't have. They don't save. They don't plan. They lack financial literacy. They lack the discipline to delay gratification. The solution, in most of the advice given to them, is to just make better choices. That explanation is not wrong because it is cruel. It is wrong because it misunderstands what is actually happening inside the brain of someone under financial pressure, and what that pressure costs them every single day before they ever touch their wallet. In 2013, two economists named Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir published a book called Scarcity. They had spent years studying what happens to people and to animals when they don't have enough. Not the emotional experience of scarcity, the cognitive one. What they found was precise. When the brain is focused on a shortage, it enters a mode they called tunneling. The attention narrows. The mind locks onto whatever is scarce, money, time, calories, anything, and begins prioritizing that problem above nearly everything else. This is not a choice. It is an automatic cognitive response, the same one that makes you think about food more when you are hungry. Tunneling has a cost. When the brain narrows its focus toward one problem, it pulls cognitive resources away from everything else. Working memory shrinks. Long-term planning becomes harder. The ability to hold multiple things in mind at once, which is exactly what financial decisions require, degrades. Not because the person is lazy, because the mental bandwidth is being consumed. Bandwidth is the total cognitive capacity available at any given moment. Every person has it, and every demand on your attention draws from it. Worrying about money does not sit quietly in the background. It runs constantly. It interrupts. Every time you wonder whether you can make rent, whether the card will go through, whether the end of the month will reach the paycheck, that is bandwidth spent. That is a calculation running in the background of every other thing you try to do. The IQ study Mullainathan ran was measuring the cost of that background process. The people who scored 13 points lower were not temporarily stupid. They were cognitively occupied. Their bandwidth was already committed. Now consider what decisions you need to make when you have very little money. You need to weigh prices against nutrition. You need to calculate whether paying one bill now means you cannot pay another next week. You need to model your income, your expenses, and your debts simultaneously, often without a buffer that would make the math simple. These are cognitively demanding tasks, and they are being performed by a brain that is already running a continuous background process on the problem of not having enough. The financial decisions made from that state will look worse than the decisions made by someone who is not under that pressure. They will look like poor judgment. They will look like a lack of discipline. But the mechanism producing them is cognitive exhaustion, not character. This is what Mullainathan and Shafir called the bandwidth tax. Scarcity does not just take your money. It borrows against your cognitive capacity, and it charges interest. The tunneling effect adds another layer. When the brain is focused on the immediate shortage, the near future disappears from view. Not because the person does not care about the future, because the tunnel makes it hard to see past the end of the week. $1 today and $1 next month do not feel equivalent when you are not sure whether next month will be manageable. Economists call this present bias. It is not unique to people in poverty, everyone has it. But the degree to which you discount future outcomes over present ones changes with how uncertain that future feels. If your financial situation is stable, next month is fairly predictable. You can afford to wait. If your situation is unstable, the future is genuinely less reliable. Prioritizing the present is not irrational. It is a rational response to real uncertainty. Research by behavioral economist Richard Thaler found that present bias is amplified exactly when people have least slack in their lives. Slack is the buffer, the extra money, time, or space that absorbs unexpected problems without causing a crisis. People with slack can make worse individual decisions and still recover. People without slack cannot absorb mistakes. Every decision is higher stakes. And higher stakes produce exactly the kind of stress tunnel thinking that makes decisions worse. In 2009, researchers Daryl Collins, Jonathan Morduch, Stuart Rutherford, and Orlando Ruffin published a study called Portfolios of the Poor. They followed 250 families in Bangladesh, India, and South Africa for a year, tracking every financial transaction. The families in the study were among the poorest in their countries. What they found contradicted almost everything assumed about how poor people manage money. These families were not financially illiterate. They were financially exhausted. They tracked their finances with extraordinary precision because they had to. They used informal loans, savings clubs, and rotating credit systems to smooth income that arrived unpredictably. They were not bad at financial management. They were managing the maximum number of variables with the minimum amount of resources and zero margin for variables with the minimum amount of resources. The advice most commonly given to people in poverty, save more, spend less, invest early, describes what a financially stable person with slack in their life can choose to do. It does not describe the options available to someone whose rent is due in 3 days and whose bank account contains $40. The scarcity trap closes the loop. Being in scarcity produces the cognitive effects that make it harder to get out of scarcity. The bandwidth tax makes long-term planning harder, precisely when long-term planning is most needed. The tunneling effect narrows attention to immediate problems, precisely when the broader picture needs to be visible. The high-stakes environment reduces decision quality precisely when decision quality matters most. This is not a cycle sustained by poor choices. It is a cycle sustained by the cognitive architecture of scarcity itself. None of this means that individual decisions are irrelevant. They are not. But what changes when you understand the mechanism is the frame. The question stops being, why doesn't this person just make better choices, and starts being what conditions would make better choices possible. Research consistently shows that when the pressure is removed, when housing is secured, when income becomes predictable, when there is any slack, the decision quality improves. Not because the person changed, because the cognitive environment changed. The researchers who did that IQ study did not give the low-scoring group a lecture on personal finance. They removed the financial worry from the scenario. The scores came back up. 13 points did not return because anyone learned more discipline. They returned because the bandwidth was freed. If this changed how you see the choices people make under pressure, what shaped this video is in the description. The research is listed below. And if you want to keep tracing the mechanisms, not the symptoms, subscribe. Every video on this channel takes something you experience every day and shows you exactly where it was built. You are not bad with money. You are thinking with a... If this changed how you see the choices people make under pressure, the research behind this video is in the description. Subscribe. Every video on this channel takes something you experience every day and traces it back to where it was actually built. You are not bad with money. You are thinking with a brain that is already full.